Today I'm talking to Rob Bohm, Project Manager and Plumbing and Heating Consultant at CLPM. Rob is going to talk us through commonly asked questions with regards to plumbing and heating. Hi Rob.
Hi Lisa. Quite often the first thing I do come across is the standard question is, how do I find a plumber? This is always a tricky one, especially if you're new to an area. Most people look in the sort of local press, but I always say the best thing to do is ask around. So ask your neighbours, any friends or any work colleagues, because recommendation is by far the best form of advertising, and everybody who is good likes to work that way and quite often will advertise it. Now, one of the biggest things is also when you ring the plumber up, he's invariably busy, and it's obviously quite a frustration. But that's actually a good sign, because a plumber who is busy is generally good. A plumber who is not busy, and if he can come straight away, I'd be quite wary of that. That's always a thing to look for. Obviously, if you are struggling that way, then obviously go through advertising. The local rag is always quite good. Online reviews is quite a good thing to do. But there are things you need to check. First of all, that it is always very handy if he's a member of the Institute of Plumbing, but obviously not mandatory. But if any doing any work on gas, he needs to be gas safe registered or oil off-tech registered. Another good little thing to check is if he's VAT registered, because that effectively means he's got to be official to be VAT registered. And another very, very important thing to check is with his public liability insurance to make sure he's covered for any misdemeanors or any problems which might happen in the future.
And what about quoting for work?
Quoting for work is quite important in a situation. If you've got a plumber you do not know and he's coming to site for the first time, you need to work out what the costs might verbally be. Now, quite often for small jobs, people normally go for estimated rather than quotation, because the actual time of sitting down and working out a full quote for a small job is not normally viable. So it'll give you an idea of costs. Now, this should also include the call-out charge and his hourly rate to give you an indication of that, so you know what you're paying. Now, also a thing to check is if he is VAT registered, to make sure the VAT is included. Otherwise, you've also got to add the 20% at the end of the job. Now, on a larger job, then it is obviously more sensible to get an actual quote rather than an estimate. Now, it's always better, if possible, to get a minimum of 3 quotes, because this will give you a sort of high, middle, and low cost. Then you can check which one you think you fancy. But it's important to look through the quotes to see if you understand them, that they are all providing the same service. Quite often someone might appear to be cheaper in the short run, but then afterwards he comes in and says, well, actually, this is extra and that's extra. So make sure they're all quoting for the same thing. Again, also to check that the VAT is included as far as that's concerned.
What would you recommend with regards to payments?
Well, payments, unfortunately, we all have to pay our bills, and most plumbers will be very happy if you pay nice and promptly. But, again, if an invoice is not clear, ask for a breakdown to see where the costs are, especially if there are extras on that. Now, another thing, obviously, is a VAT scenario, that some new work is zero-rated. Or, if, for example, if you're converting, say, a garage into a habitation, then it's only 5% rated. So there can be a saving as far as that's concerned. And your plumber might not actually know this or might not bring it to the fore. As far as the one thing is to look for is that if you have no invoice, if he just sort of gives you a scrap of paper and says, oh, it's, 500 quid, and can we have cash, please, then you have little proof that he's actually done the job. So therefore, coming back for a guarantee, for a year's guarantee, can be a bit tricky. So if you can get an official written invoice with all the various details on it, that's far, far better. Something also to look for, if you actually are having any sort of new major equipment, for example, a boiler, a hot water tank, so on and so forth, it will come with various guarantees. Some boilers have 2 or even 5-year guarantees, extended versions, which are available to help the scenario. But it will only be on the boiler itself and not actually on its labour. But it's certainly worth looking into.
And what about maintenance contracts?
Maintenance contracts can be a little bit tricky. Generally speaking, they're only provided by very large companies or generally the gas board. Now, they will provide you quite a good service on your system if it's relatively new. If it's a very old clunky system, then they're not going to be interested at all. But the advantage, obviously, is their call-out times, because if there is an issue and you are paid your due fees, then they will come out, have a minimum time to come out. But be very careful and check what's actually covered. Because if they say, oh, actually, I have to replace something else, which is not covered within their details, then the charges can be quite prohibitive, and then it becomes more cheaper to actually have a local plumber. So that's the most thing, is really to check out whether you think it's viable. But on a new heating system, it can be. Quite often, many parts for boilers can go into the several hundreds of pounds by the time they're being sort of replaced by a general plumber. So it's worth looking into.
From what you are saying, Rob, plumbing and heating can be quite complicated. Is there anything to simplify the process?
Unfortunately not. Many years of experience is what sort of makes it look simple. But it's worth sometimes doing a bit of research yourself. There are many forums of going around where people are happy to play themselves, but I don't envisage or ask people to sort of get their hands dirty and pick the spanners up and attack things themselves, because they can cause problems. As they will say, little knowledge is a dangerous thing. But it's good to be prepared. So when your plumber comes and says, oh, it's a backdraft insulator which is gone, you need to know what that actually might possibly be. And if you do know, that obviously can be quite a saving, because you can say, well, actually, I think you're charging me far too much for that part. That's just way over the top. So a little bit of research actually is pretty good. If you're not happy, then obviously a second opinion is always a good thing to go through. If there are serious claims, it's always good to get an independent advisor who has no monetary interest as far as the job is concerned to give you an independent survey. But obviously that's something you would have to pay for.
With regards to boilers, when will I know when I need to change the boiler?
That's always a good question. The old adage is, if it's not broken, don't fix it. What generally happens is quite a few people, when they're sort of being contracted to come and service boilers, I do believe they actually are sort of maybe given a little bit of a financial incentive to try to get the client to change their boiler. Now, boilers themselves, providing they're safe, providing they conform to all regulations, and providing you can get parts for them, there's no reason to change it, unless you are really interested in changing it because of its size or its position, or you're doing some major alterations to the property and the boiler needs to be upgraded. But there's no reason to change it just for the sake of it, because, yes, a new boiler will be more efficient, more compact, quieter to run, but it will take some time to recoup the cost of the initial installation. And also, there's quite a good chance that some of the heating system or other parts of the system will need to be upgraded to enable it to work properly. So it's quite a serious thing to look at. But just because the guy says, well, it's an old boiler, I think you should change it, I would say probably not. Take some more other advice, because generally speaking, a boiler change for any installer is quite a lucrative job because of the normal discount they can get on the units themselves. So it's something you really need to have a look at. But don't just go, oh, yes, he says I got to change it, then change it.
That's great. Now, can you explain the difference between a Combi and a standard boiler?
Yes. Now, that's one thing, is that leads nicely on from the changing the boiler, because quite often the next installer could possibly say, oh, we can give you a Combi boiler. It's much better than the one you've got now. Now, a Combi boiler is something which you generally find in smaller properties, in small flats or small cottages or small houses. The reason being for them is the hot water usage. Now, they're a clever piece of equipment, and they're very, very compact, so there's no need for any other storage tanks or anything else, just the box itself. And as the cold water comes in, it heats it on the way through, which means you can have one bath or you can have 20 baths, and you'll never run out of hot water. But the problem is if you have a larger house and then you have multiple people wanting to use taps all at the same time, then obviously each time you open another tap, the pressure drops and the pressure drops and the pressure drops to a point where it can start to just come out sort of as a trickle. Also, the other thing to think about is that with a Combi boiler, because everything is all within one box, if you have a breakdown, then you have no hot water at all or heating. Where if you have a standard boiler, which is what you normally expect to find in an older house, you have a boiler and a separate hot water tank, then obviously if the boiler does actually break down, you have the backup of the immersion heater. So you can turn the immersion heater on, and at least you've got hot water even if you haven't got heating. So it's something to sort of think about. And if someone says, oh yes, it's a far better job to put one of those in, ask why and do a little bit of research.
I've heard of a mains-only system. What is this?
Well, that kind of links on. A Combi boiler is a mains-only system. Effectively, what that means is you don't have any storage tanks in the loft. The old-fashioned way of having water in a house was having a mains tap which went to your water supply, which went to your kitchen sink tap, and then storage tanks in the loft. Now, this was the old way with the gravity supply coming down, so you had low pressure throughout the house. And then people said, well, actually, I want a decent shower, and then they put pumps into it. Now, a way over that is to have a mains-only system with the cold water coming in, feeds the hot water tank and all the various outlets. But it only works well if you have a good water pressure and good water flow. Now, there's another thing to think about as well, because people get a bit mixed up between flow and pressure. Now, flow is how much water you get, and pressure is how fast it comes out. So you could have high pressure and low flow, which is rubbish, so it just trickles out once you actually open the tap. And likewise, you could have high flow and low pressure, so you get lots of water, but it doesn't actually go very far. So the combination of you want high flow and high pressure.
If someone was interested in ecosystems and products, where would they get more information on that?
Oh, ecosystems and products, they are expensive and they are a thing of the future and they are with us. But generally speaking, currently, a gas boiler is still the most cost-effective product. They are very cheap to buy, cheap to run, and cheap to maintain. Air source systems, ground source systems, solar panels and the like are being touted as the next great thing. And yes, they are efficient, but they do cost quite a lot of money to install, and you will take a long time to get a payback period. Oil boilers have not really improved over the last few years. They've actually stopped any development of them because of the cost implications of doing so, and also because in a few years' time they actually will be tricky to actually meet any standards of insulation qualities that are required. Now, the best way of improving your house is to actually improve it thermally. That's extra insulation and draft proofing, because the less air changes, the less heat you've got to put into the property to start with. So there is good things on the market, but again, a lot of research is required. And if you go through the general councils rather than going through an independent, council rather than a supplier, because the supplier will always be able to tout their goods.
And for any information on the subject you have discussed today, Rob, where can they go?
Or who would they need to speak to?
Well, ecosystems, there are many people you can go to. We have independent advisors who are always quite good to look at, because independent advisors aren't trying to sell any products. All they are doing is trying to provide a service. Now, we as a company do this, so if you are interested, we can help you with this. But be wary of contacting the actual suppliers themselves, because all they want to do is actually sell you a product.
That's great, Rob. Thank you for the useful information.
Okay, that's okay. Pleasure to help.